filmed the arrival of the survivors at the local community hospital, where anxious relatives were waiting. The physician on duty was Dr. Lee.
The two patients that were brought in had the lowest body temperature that we'd ever seen in our hospital, and the lowest body temperature that we knew of anyone in this area in the Northwest that had been treated for hypothermia and survived. There are a lot of studies and certainly a lot of circumstances where someone would say that once you give up on your own life and your own experience, that you're going to lose whatever that survival test is. You're going to flunk it, you're going to die, you're not going to make it. But I don't think that's the case at all. And I think Frosty is an excellent example of that, because that's exactly what he did, is that he not only gave up on his own life, he gave up on everything and made peace with that. And as a response to that, reached out to other people. And that's exactly what helped him survive.
Many of the 2,300 passengers were thrown or jumped into the freezing ocean. 1,489 died. Every one of those deaths was recorded as a drowning. Yet many of those who died were strong swimmers, and there were sufficient life jackets for all. So what did kill them? The answer only began to emerge at the end of the Second World War. The British Royal Navy calculated that 2/3 of all deaths happened not in combat, but in the sea. The statistics were a major surprise to every maritime nation. And like the Titanic's victims, many of the dead did not simply drown. Scientists and doctors began the hunt for the mystery killer. The clue lay in this brief moment, the second when someone suddenly plunges from air into water. The killer, it was discovered, was not the water itself, but its temperature.
Cold water can have a devastating and strange effect on the human body. If you follow your instincts in cold water, you're more likely to die. Most people are under the impression that if you're suddenly plunged into ice-cold water, that you would die in under 10 minutes because of profound hypothermia. In fact, most people do die within 10 to 15 minutes, but it has absolutely nothing to do with hypothermia. People are dying because of cold shock within those first 15 minutes.
Dr. Eric Weiss is one of the world's leading experts in the study of cold water immersion. Experiments recreate what happens when someone is suddenly subjected to the extremes of immersion in cold water.
If someone unexpectedly plunges into icy cold water, they develop uncontrollable reflexes which make it very difficult to survive. The first thing that happens is they have an involuntary, uncontrollable gasp. In fact, they feel like they're not getting enough air, but what they're doing is they're going and they're breathing 5 to 10 times the normal rate. And if they happen to have their face near or under the surface of the water, there's a great potential that they will draw water into the lungs or into the back of the throat, which can produce spasms back there and produce profound panic and make it very difficult for one to tread water or to keep their head on the surface of the water. And so these people eventually die of drowning, but the drowning is caused by the cold shock of the water.
Cold water literally takes your breath away because of the way it can rapidly remove the body's heat. A thermal camera shows body temperature in terms of color. White is the warmest and black the coldest.
Water has an enormous potential to conduct heat away from the body. It does that 25 times greater than air at the same temperature. You can never overcome that significant effect of the water. Therefore, you should always get as much of your body out of the water as possible.
After only 60 seconds in water at 15 degrees Celsius, the temperature of the North Atlantic in summer, the thermal camera reveals how dramatically this man's temperature has dropped. Even after he has left the water, his body warms up again only slowly. When you plunge into cold water, you enter a survival obstacle race. The cold shock response is only the first of 4 hurdles you will have to face. Any one of these hurdles can kill you.
If you're still alive after 5 minutes in ice-cold water, then you have survived the first stage of cold water shock. The next thing you have to deal with is outer body cooling and core hypothermia. Your body will begin to respond by uncontrollable shivering to try and generate heat to keep your body from cooling. Shivering is a response to cooling of the skin and really has nothing to do with core hypothermia. At the same time, the blood vessels on the surface of the skin will shrink down very, very tiny so that blood flow does not go to the surface but stays in the core. The downside to that is you get dramatic cooling of the skin, the nerves, and the muscles near the surface. And within 10 to 15 minutes, an individual finds it very difficult to coordinate their muscles. They're not hypothermic in their core, but their muscles and nerves are almost paralyzed because of the cold.
You're shaking so hard that it's just like a burn. You can't stop the muscles from shaking, and it's just like their muscles are burning. And it never went away. It just constantly was like that. And you just, at first you have that on your mind all the time, but because the cold is still always there, but you can never get rid of that shaking and that burning feeling.
The next lethal hurdle in the cold water immersion obstacle race is hypothermia, the cooling of the body's inner core. You become lethargic. The mind becomes confused, which can lead to irrational behavior and eventually death. The effects of being immersed in freezing water became terribly real when an Air Florida 737 crashed into the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. in 1981. Of the 76 passengers and crew, only 5 survived. When someone is profoundly hypothermic, their heart is beating very slow and their blood pressure is very low. It's at the borderline of maintaining consciousness. Their arms and legs have become useless. They cannot physically pull themselves out of the water. They are incapable of self-rescue. This individual is trying to grab onto this life buoy. She grabs on, is lifted out of the water only to lose consciousness and fall back into the water.
Matthews, grab the pipe pole! Never mind!
Finally, another individual swam over to where she was, and she was pulled to rescue.
Okay, we got it right there. Now, give me electrical engine. You got it then. Give me electrical and over here to go quick.
When I worked with air-sea rescue squadrons in the 1960s, I came across several examples of people who were alive before rescue, talking to other survivors in the water. And yet, when they got on board the helicopter, they were found to be dead. So they died very quickly, and that death was could not be due to cold. That's much more suggestive of a blood circulation problem, almost as if they had a heart attack during the rescue period. At the point of rescue, two new challenges confront Frosty. First is that people, just on the point of being rescued, when the helicopter appears overhead, they suddenly seem to say, "Oh, thank God for that." And the adrenaline, which has helped to maintain their blood pressure and keep them alive throughout their survival ordeal, suddenly stops flowing. And at that stage, their blood pressure could fall and their heart could stop. The second danger is that if they have to make a physical effort to assist in their own rescue, then that will increase the workload of the heart at a time when this heart is beating very slowly, and again, that could be catastrophic and could stop his heart as well. In the Cougar incident, those who put on extra clothes were very wise. That action alone probably helped to save their life more than anything else. Regrettably, the captain who didn't, I'm afraid it was probably a major contributory cause to him not surviving.
Both Pat Watson and Callie Wynn did what you think would save their lives, but was actually more likely to kill them: swimming.
In normal circumstances, exercise warms you up. But in water, when you exercise, you're moving your arms and your legs, well then you're accelerating the rate of heat loss to the surrounding water. So in water, the best thing to do is to stay as still as you possibly can, keep your legs together, the arms by your side, and wait patiently for the rescuers to come to you rather than you trying to swim to save your own life. Because swimming will accelerate the heat loss and you will die more quickly.
Being able to swim for 6 hours in that temperature is truly an extraordinary feat, probably explained by his enormous size, because large people cool slower than small people, and by the amount of fat and muscle that he has, which protected him from hypothermia because it acts as insulation.
Gudlauger struggled ashore, cutting his bare feet on the sharp volcanic rocks. He walked for over a mile until he reached an isolated homestead where he collapsed from exhaustion and hypothermia. Here, hundreds of people die by falling through thin ice in what appears to be on the surface an ideal winter playground. One winter day in 1984, 4-year-old Jimmy Totelwitz was out sledding by Lake Michigan with his father. They strayed onto an area of weak ice.
Jimmy!
It had started as a sled ride along the ice-coated rock on the shore of Lake Michigan at Wilson. A slip, and 35-year-old Terrence Totlowitz and his 4-year-old son James were suddenly in the near-freezing water.
It took over a quarter of an hour to rescue Jimmy's father.
That left a child somewhere in the murky, ice-clogged water. See, this is all solid ice here. Time after time, the divers surfaced. Nothing, they shouted. But then the divers nodded. Success of a sort.
A number of children have, despite being underwater for incredible amounts of time, much longer than anyone would ever predict possible, despite the fact that when they're pulled out of the water, they have absolutely no signs of life, no heartbeat, no breathing, their pupils are fixed and unreactive. After prolonged periods of resuscitation, some of these people are brought back to life. It's like life after death, because they literally are dead and then they're resuscitated. It is absolutely remarkable and defies all predictions for outcome.
Jimmy survived after being submerged for an astonishing 38 minutes. How is it some children like Jimmy can survive underwater for such extreme lengths of time? It is still a scientific mystery, but it may be related to the fact that as babies, we have an innate affinity for the womb-like environment of water. Babies have not lost the instincts that link humans with their more primitive evolutionary selves when water was their natural environment. As we grow older, we don't use it, so we lose it. It could also be that babies retain something of the response that other mammals have in water. Some species of seal can survive for up to 40 minutes on one lungful of air by a process known as the diving response. Blood is directed away from the extremities and to the organs that need oxygen the most, such as the brain and the heart. Yet there is another theory as to why some children can survive prolonged periods of time underwater. When the body is very cold, its metabolism slows and the requirement for oxygen is reduced. If the brain can cool quickly enough, before it is damaged by lack of oxygen, the chance of survival is increased. The body must very swiftly cool from the inside as well as the outside. And the only way for this to happen is by the rapid breathing of a lot of cold water into the lungs.
Children have stronger hearts than adults do, and they can probably keep pumping blood around when oxygen levels fall, whereas in an adult, the heart would probably stop. And if you can keep this cooled blood going to the brain and to the other organs and cool those organs very quickly before the heart stops, then you can protect them from dying from lack of oxygen. And it's really quite a paradox, isn't it? Because the same reflexes and shock that leads to death when someone has their head above the water probably saves their life when their head is below the surface of the water.
And so in the most extreme cases, when the human body is stretched to the limits of endurance, that relentless killer, cold water, can ironically become a lifesaver. And for the survivors, life will never be the same again, as Frosty Sloan's doctor knows.
It literally does scrub their life experiences totally clean, right down to the real basics. And even when you meet somebody 50 or 60 years after they've had that kind of an experience, it has changed them. I mean, and it stays with them. That sort of elemental quality stays with them forever.
I came very close to losing everything in just a matter of a day, because I know I really appreciate my family a lot more and think about them a lot more than I did before. I took them for granted, and now I don't, not for a minute. And I think that's it, is to appreciate what you have, because you could lose it in a heartbeat. And I came really close, and I don't ever want to lose that again.
Through Frosty Sloan's experience and the ordeals of many others like him, mankind has begun to understand all the dangers posed by one of nature's greatest forces, the sea.